let's take a look at the last four views on our View Layout tab. First, we have Broken Out Section, and typically this is reserved for assemblies, but it can be used on parts as well. Let's take a look at a Broken Out View section on one of our views here, and then we'll take a look at it on an assembly as well. Whenever you're using any of these views on the right-hand side, the Broken Out, Break, Crop View, or Alternate Position View, they're going to be a destructive view. And what I mean by that is they're going to use whatever view you select. Unlike when we created a section view or a detailed view, these broken out, break, crop view, and alternate position view are going to override your current view settings. So let's take a look at our broken out section on this view here. Now what you want to do is you want to start drawing a spline, and it needs to be a complete closed profile back to itself. We're going to show a preview, and we're going to start modifying the distance. Once we make it 100 millimeters into the file, you can see the view plane on the top view. This is actually cutting away a section of our model, so it's very similar to a section view, but it's a bit more obscure. Let's go ahead and hit cancel so we don't create that view, and you'll notice it leaves the spline behind. We'll delete the spline, and let's take a look at it on an assembly view. Let's open this Swing Arm Assembly 7 assembly file. Now the only difference between this and the Swing Arm Assembly 6 file that we created earlier in our lessons is that I've converted our sketch block from the original layout sketch into its own part. This allows us to move it up and down like a part without having to rebuild the sketch every time. This saves us from having to create a new solid component that uses the original information from our layout sketch and removes some of the complexity we have from moving that. So now we want to go up to New, create a new drawing from this file, and say OK. Now, before I place a view, I'm actually going to modify the sheet. I'm going to go to Sheet Format, right-click, and go to Properties. I'm going to change this to an A1 size to make it a little bit bigger. Then I'll go over to my view palette and I'll place a front view. Now I'm going to hit Escape, select this view, and scroll down to our custom scale. Let's try to make it 1/2 the size. So now we have a fairly large view here. You'll notice that we have blue coordinates on multiple components. They're showing us various aspects. We have components that are sub-assemblies like our shock, when we have individual components inside there, and they're showing us a center of mass location for those. They're also showing us points of reference. But let's not be too concerned with those right now. What we really want to look at is a broken out section. And again, this takes place of the original view that you select, so it is a destructive view. Well, let's just start creating a spline in here and say OK. Now with an assembly broken out view, you have a section scope. In this case, we're not going to exclude specific features, but you can do that. You also notice that there are some options on the right-hand side, auto hatching and exclude fasteners. Once you say OK, you will also still have those options here. Let's select a preview, and with the preview, you can see what happens on the screen. It starts to cut away from our components. If we go down 25 millimeters, we cut all the way through the outside section of our dog bone link, but you'll notice that we don't cut into the linkage that we created, and we don't cut into the shock. If we go a bit farther, we start to cut into those as well. So again, this is destructive. It's going to use whichever view we select and not create a new view based on it. So be very careful when you start to use things like broken out section, or really any of these options in the right-hand side, that it is going to take part of your view. Let's take a look at break. Now, break is typically reserved for components made of structural members like round tubing or square tubing, or those types of members where you have really long sections of a similar material or a similar shape. Now, in this case, we're going to just take a look at a break view, and it's not going to really give us a great idea of how the option works, but we're going to take a look at it anyways. We're going to select this model, we're going to rotate the break, and we're going to break out the section of the upper half of our shock. And you notice that we also have some options. We can reduce the gap size, and we can change the way that it's cut. You can see that we have straight cut, curve cut, zigzag, and small zigzag. You'll also notice that here is one of the areas where it doesn't work very well, or rather it gives us some problems. Because this was at an angle to start with, you'll notice that the break cut doesn't automatically align it. So if you have structural members that are at an angle, it's going to create the view at an angle and offset. So I'm going to undo and get out of that view, and let's take a look at crop view. Now crop view is kind of interesting, and for that I'm going to go back to our machine part design sheet. Now, crop view needs to have something before you create the view. It needs to have a closed sketch entity. And for that, I'm going to go ahead and create a new projected view. So I'm going to select this view and create a projected view downward. I'm going to say OK. And And then I'm going to go to my Sketch tab and create a circle. Now the circle is going to encompass this area of my design. Now once I have the circle created, I'll go back to my view layout and I'll select crop view. So you'll notice what this does is very similar to creating our detailed view, but the exception here is that it's set to the scale of the view, like we don't have the option to scale it up or down, and it also does not create an additional view. It takes the original view and simply removes the additional material. So this is why I wanted to create a new view and not destroy one of the others. I'm going to go ahead and save this, and we'll take a look at alternate position view. To this, we have to go back to SwingArm Assembly 7 and take a look at what this means. Now, alternate position view needs to have an assembly that has motion in it, or you can move the components around. This is the main reason why I converted a portion of the layout sketch into its own part to make it easier to move around. Now, if I grab this view, you notice that nothing really happens inside here. We don't have control of it like we do in an assembly, but we are going to be able to move it around once we select to create an alternate position view. Now, one thing that you have to note with an alternate position view is it cannot be the only view inside of your assembly. So we're going to have to create a new view. And in this case, I'm just going to create a back view and I'm going to drag it in here. Now, one thing you'll note is oftentimes it tries to snap to a position. Now, if that ever happens, you can hold down the control key to override that option, but I'm going to place the view, I'm going to select it, and I'm going to scale it up. I'm going to go ahead and again use 1/2. But I'm going to select the original view. I'm going to take that to a 1:5. So I'll put it up in the left-hand corner. Then I'll move this into a position where it's easier for us to see. Now with the view selected, I can select alternate position view. And you notice that we have some options. We can create a new configuration, or we can use an existing configuration. So if your assembly contains multiple configurations with multiple positions, you can use that in this section of the alternate position design. If you instead select to create a new configuration, we say OK, it brings us back to the assembly, and we need to free drag the components. So I'm going to drag this all the way up until the shock is completely compressed and say OK. Brings me back to the drawing. I select it again, I do an alternate view, create another new configuration, say OK, and this time I'm going to drag it all the way down, say OK, and it brings me back to the assembly. So you see what we've done here is we've created 3 different positions of our assembly components. You notice that the original has full weight lines, and both of the alternate views have dash lines. This is a great way for you to show things like the massive amounts of travel or different positions of, for instance, a lever or a knob in your design. And we can always go to individual components. We can right-click and we can say Show Hide and Hide Component. That allows us to hide components, and we can also do it back at the assembly level. If we go back to the assembly, we can select this component and we can hide it or change transparency. If we expand the display pane, you notice that we can show it here. We can go to any of the configurations that we've added, hide it here as well, and go back to any other alternate positions and make sure it's hidden in those as well. So now if we go back to our drawing, we can show multiple positions, and you'll notice that we have it in only one position now. So back in our SwingArm assembly, we'll go to our last configuration, make sure it's hidden there as well. Now we have a nice clean view with only the shock assembly and the linkage showing 3 different positions. So this is a great way for us to make multiple view positions when we have assemblies with complex motion. Now there are a few other views that seem to be a little bit more of an advanced topic, but I do want to mention them here. If we go to Insert, down to Drawing View, you notice that we have all the standard ones that we've taken a look at. There is a relative to model view that you should look into, and there's also empty and predefined. Empty and predefined views allow you to make empty view sets on your default template. So when you create the view, it automatically places your object into it. So they can be handy, but it is, again, a little bit more of an advanced topic that allows you to create more advanced templates that save you work down the line, especially if you're doing the same thing over and over again with the standard 3 views, placing dimensions, and so on. You can really incorporate some automation into that.